G'day guys. This one will be on arsenic and exposures to it and issues related to it and things that we can do and stuff like that. It does affect people in rural areas primarily, in many developing countries around the world. So it can be, especially in places like India, places like Pakistan, places like Bangladesh, other parts of Southeast Asia tend to have groundwater like wells and stuff, like old wells that are more prone to higher levels of arsenic in them and stuff like that. So it can be a problem for those populations, including the sort of foods that they eat, especially if they're using well water to water these foods as well. You know, those plants will take up more arsenic than normal. So it can be an issue for a number of populations around the world. Let's just get into it. So if you're actually exposed to, this is the sort of stuff you can sort of expect. It's quite damaging to the body, arsenic in high doses. Small amounts are required by the body. Don't get me wrong, you can't go zero. That'll have negative effects as well, but excessive amounts is a problem. And it is a problem in a lot of developing countries and a lot of regions. You can get this sort of really, like in Bangladesh here, this really severe sort of situation that can emerge. So it can be quite problematic and all that. You know, sort of foods that you find it in that'll actually concentrate it. So if you actually water an environment, and it'll actually concentrate, which is rice, cereal. I suspect chicken, because they fed some of the, a lot of kibble related stuff. So if they're feeding them grain and rice and whatever else that is actually rich in, that has a lot of arsenic in it, obviously chickens are more prone to things like that. Mushrooms seem to have more, and seafood seems to have more, but seafood's less of a problem because we do have higher levels of selenium, and selenide can, like with mercury, also with, can mitigate some of those problems. So it's less of a problem in seafood to worry about, and it's in such low amounts, it's irrelevant. But those are the sort of foods you won't find much in ruminant animals, which is a good thing, since most of us, that's what we consume. Pressure-treated woods can be higher in arsenic, which can be a problem. This video sort of covers a lot. I won't do it, run that, because now for acute and chronic arsenic toxicity, arsenic exerts its toxicity in inactivating 200 enzymes, especially those involved in cellular energy pathways, DNA synthesis and repair. So acute arsenic poisoning, associated initially with nausea, vomiting, abdominal pain, and severe diarrhea. So, depending on the level, it can be, at certain thresholds, it can be fatal as well. So two worst affected areas in the world are Bangladesh, West Bengal of India, so in 42 districts of southern Bangladesh, and in 9 adjacent districts in West Bengal. So 79.9 million and 42.7 million people respectively are exposed to groundwater arsenic concentrations that are above the WHO maximum permitted limit of 50 micrograms per litre. In both these areas, the source of arsenic in geological origins, contaminated aquifers, which provide water for over 1 million tube wells. In West Bengal, the arsenic concentrations in some tube wells is as high as 3,400 micrograms per litre. I'll just illustrate how high that can be. So 3 divided by 50, which is the sort of permitted limit. We're talking about a 68-fold. That's massive. Okay, so that's a massive percentage. We're talking about in the thousands percent. So not a good thing at all for populations I'll just go down here. So this just covers toxicity related information, arsenic exposure, stuff like that. Seafood and algae are richest organic sources. Difference is between fish and algae. Fish tend to have more selenium, so they're actually less of a problem in that regard. So that's another thing. So there's some information here about skin, the gastrointestinal system, cardiovascular system, neurological system, so these are all, so respiratory, endocrine, malignant disease. Now, there is also something as arsenic deficiency. Okay, in animal, deficiency is manifested as increased mortality. So if you're deficient in arsenic, you'll die quicker and earlier. Reduced fertility, increased spontaneous abortion rates, low birth weight in offspring, and damage to red blood cells. So you need some. So arsenic deficiency can be a problem as well, but it's much rarer because most people will eat some seafood. Most people usually eat a lot of those sources. It's the high amounts. And this video is primarily, there are issues also with well water in Finland as well in certain areas. That's well documented in Finland. There's quite a lot of information, and there's also, it's a wealthier country which has got better mitigation strategies to dealing with that. But these populations are more prone to things like bladder cancer, kidney issues, liver issues, lung issues, skin issues, from the higher levels, and not only cancer related, but also in terms of other pathologies in that regard. Anyway, so what can we do? Now, these populations are also tend to have a much lower animal-based diet. Would that have something to do with it? Well, let's check this out. Protection of taurine against arsenic-induced DNA damage of mice kidneys. Interesting. The purpose of the study is to explore the protective capacity of taurine on arsenic-induced neurotoxicity. 30 mice were used and 10 rats in each group. Yes, throw a couple of rats in there just to spice it all up. And let's just... As you can see, these sort of abnormalities, sort of differences. Oops. People can go through and actually look at this at their own time. It was reported the accumulation of arsenic was found in mouse kidney tissue after oral administration of sodium arsenic at 10 milligrams per kilogram for 2 days. Abnormal morphological changes were shown. Epithelial cells of kidneys. Studies showed that levels of lipid peroxidation significantly increased in the kidneys of mice exposed to 25 milligrams per litre, blah, 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 for 3 months. In the present study, our results show that abnormal morphological changes of PCT and the errors kidney tissue as treated indicated that the kidneys are a major target organ of toxicity induced by arsenic. We saw that in that other previous thing, that is an issue as well. On the other hand, the cells of PCT shows slightly swollen in the protective group, but the boundary of the cell was clear. Got it? So implying taurine prevents from abnormal morphological changes in the renal tissue of treated mice. So it actually protects the mice kidney tissue from these abnormal changes. Okay. However, pre-treatment with taurine prevented arsenic toxicity, so as to testicular structural maintenance in the normal state. So, good, the ball sack, keep that under protection. It is indicated that taurine supplementation protects against arsenic-induced nephrotoxicity in the kidneys of mice. That's your take-home message. Also shows that arsenic-induced reactive oxygen species leads to the damage of DNA. In this study, to assess as induced DNA damage, we examined blah, blah, blah. Our results show comet cells, the longer tail, comet cells, tail length and comet significantly raised in the arsenic group compared to the control. Anyway, so the results show no significant DNA strand break, such as increased tail length and elevated tail comet in the renal tissue of mice with taurine compared with the control. That's important. So basically, the mice that did not get the intervention of taurine showed the problems, but the mice that did get the actual showed no difference compared to the control. So the results show no significant the DNA strand breaks, such as an increased tail length and elevated tail moment of comment in the renal tissue of mice with taurine compared with control. So no significant differences, which basically means that even though, unlike the control, these ones are being exposed, they're not getting the damage. So the take-home message is, in these countries, they tend to be, look, the level of vegetarianism is quite prevalent in India and quite prevalent in places like Bangladesh and stuff like that. Plus the effects of this sort of groundwater contamination and stuff like that is possibly making these populations far more susceptible. Now, if they had more taurine-rich foods, which are animal-based foods, they potentially would be faring a hell of a lot better than they are at the moment. Maybe the authorities in that country should recommend, because you're not going to, look, it's always hard in societies that have actually grown over decades and decades with a certain way of believing, a certain way of eating, which is tied into their culture. Potentially they could supplement with taurine or somehow add it to the food supply to sort of get it around and reduce the sort of level of, effects on these people. So, but obviously, if your relatives or friends or whatever come from such an environment, sometimes even in the first world, there are regions of the United States, regions of Australia and Europe and other parts of the world that do have, especially in rural areas, that do have certain higher levels of arsenic. In pesticides and other things like that, there can be higher levels of arsenic. So there are issues out there, even in developed countries. You know, taurine supplementation may be an important, not, you know, quite necessary option for those sort of environments. If you're close to an industrial area that you may be exposed to higher levels of arsenic, that's another problem as well for some population groups. So this is sort of a general cover. It's not intended to basically be, you know, obviously if you get exposed to very high levels of heavy metals of any sort or contaminants of any sort, or toxic chemical compounds like arsenic or whatever, you should always seek medical treatment and medical advice. You should always basically get tested to find out their hair, a hair sample. You can actually get, you know, provide hair samples, and there are a whole lot of other tests out there. The doctor, if they are from a specific region where there may be more prevalence, these issues, they'll probably know what tests to do. So that would give you some information as a baseline. But if you're concerned, you live in one of these regions and you're concerned, I would consider taurine supplementation. You can't leave these regions for a lot of economic reasons or whatever. Taurine may be your best option for you and your family to basically reduce or mitigate a lot of these problems that high levels of arsenic could cause. So I'm not saying it's a panacea. Obviously, you know, it helps, but then again, you know, it depends on, as I said, the dose, the level of exposure can vary from place to place. There's probably a threshold where taurine can't really do much for you after that if you're exposed to extremely high levels. But obviously, compared to somebody exposed to arsenic and somebody, you know, I would rather be a person that's actually taking the taurine if I was in an area that had the potential of being exposed, rather than basically trying my luck other ways, you know, and hoping for the best. So it's an option of supplementing in, you know, in the areas where you may be more at risk. There's sort of dosages. It's really hard, that one, to recommend any exact, but I would say I would definitely be looking at 4 to 6 grams of taurine per day. That would be definitely, you know, but obviously if you do get exposed, I would go much higher. So if you know you've actually been exposed, you've been tested, and it's actually, I would definitely go much higher and all that. But at the end of the day, you can look at the studies, you can actually work out the sort of levels that they were using for the animals and all that, and whether that is appropriate for you and all that. This is not a recommendation. This is not medical advice. This is just to give you a bit of a background on the issue that exists in a number of countries. It's more severe than others. It tends to be more of a problem in rural areas in developed countries, but it does exist. People do get exposed. Some of the sources can be non-environmental. They can be by petrochemical inputs like certain fertilizers and stuff like that are much higher. People working in the agricultural sector may be exposed to higher levels. Some people working in rural areas in the mining industry can be exposed to higher levels as well, depending on the different soils that are being mined, may have higher or lower levels of arsenic. people that are involved in specific type industries may be also exposed to higher levels, especially a lot of trade type related industries. So it's something to keep in mind and consider, not when it comes to shifting your diet more to an animal based, and also considering shifting your dosage as well of taurine to a slightly higher level to mitigate a lot of these problems. So it's, for me, I still believe that if you can extricate yourself from such a region, or would be the best thing to do. Exposure and then trying to mitigate it is not I don't think it's the best approach. But at the end of the day, I don't know what people's circumstances are, how, contractually tied in to a certain place, mortgages, all sorts of things that actually tie them to a place where it makes it much more difficult, work that they can't find elsewhere. It's a lot of issues, and I realise that I'm sympathetic. I'm just providing an option that if you are likely or in an exposed type area, or some of your relatives are and all that, taurine should be considered as an option, as both a preventative option, but also as a therapeutic after the fact. How effective it is after the fact, obviously it may mitigate further damage, but it's probably not going to, reversing existing damage is going to take a hell of a lot longer. Obviously, once you've actually had a lot of cellular damage, we can't expect miracles here either. But small amount of damage is probably reversible. Prevention is better than cure in many cases. So, anyway, hope you got something out of it. Anyway, see yous.